Good afternoon. I'm standing in for Anne Lang, and this is what she has written. "'Tis almost Valentine's Day. Perhaps no better time for each of us to think about our own heart as a garden being planted with delicious fruits and vegetables." This is a central image in Dr. Joel Keenan's provocative talk that you will hear this afternoon. He will look to the past to explain how ancient people with plant-based diets lived long, healthy lives, and argue that changing what we eat, we can not only heal ourselves, but even go far for saving our planet. Dr. Keenan is a board-certified internist practicing in New Hampshire and Maine, a graduate of Tufts University with a major in English. He also graduated from the University of Vermont Medical School, completing his residency at Yale University. More recently, he has earned a master's degree in nutrition at the University of New England. So here is Dr. Keenan.
Thank you. Thank you, Linda. Thank you very much. Thank you, folks, and thank you so much for coming. I saw the poster for this talk today when I was coming in, and I thought, boy, I'd like to see that talk. That is a talk that I gave last fall, and I'm going to give the gist of that talk today, but I'll tell you the truth. I've been thinking for the last couple of months about a particular problem, and that's really what I want to share with you and focus on today. But as part of doing that, I will hit the highlights of the talk that was advertised for this show, okay? Our lifespan is increasing, and our health span is decreasing at the same time. We're living longer and getting less healthy at the same time. That's what I've been thinking about and reading about and wondering about, and I want to talk about how that's possible, why it is, and what we can do about it. So, health span is how long you're healthy, lifespan's how long you live. And for all the animals in the world, for all time, insects and porpoises and buffalo and all the others, their health span equals their lifespan. As long as they're alive, they're healthy, and then they die. And it is true as well for us Homo sapiens. For our entire 300,000 year history, we were healthy for almost our entire lives, and then we died. But all that changed 3 generations ago in the lives of our grandparents, and then our parents, and then us. Let's talk about what happened. There were 3 big changes in how we lived. One was we adopted a sedentary lifestyle because we could. The automobile was invented. It was a huge change in how we live. Second, in 1900, less than 8% of the adult population smoked. In 1960, 40% of adults smoked. Do you remember in your parents' houses, the living room with the clouds of smoke? Everybody was smoking. And something else happened, also at the turn of the 20th century. In 1895, 2 brothers in Battle Creek, Michigan, invented this, Kellogg's Corn Flakes. And this was a revolution. Food had not previously come in a box. You had to grow food or kill food and cook it and eat it. That's how it was done for all time. But that changed in our grandparents' lifetimes, and then in our parents', and then in ours. And that was a huge, huge change in our diet. We adopted a processed food diet, culminating in 1957 in its apotheosis, high fructose corn syrup. So what we ate changed, how we lived changed, we started smoking, we stopped exercising, and we started dying like mad. In 1850, the death rate from heart disease was less than 1%. 100 years later, 40% of all adults were dying from heart disease. We invented our leading cause of death. It was a catastrophe. It was an epidemic. In 1 year, 8 congressmen died while in office. Nebraska could not keep their Senate seat warm. They went through 9 U.S. senators in 3 years. People were literally dropping like flies. So this was a big problem. This had never happened, and heart disease and cancer became our leading causes of death by far, and they never had been before. We invented our 2 leading causes of death. Now this became apparent around the 1960s, and people started looking around and saying, hey, something's not right here. And so we physicians leapt into action, and we said, among other things, listen, you know how we told you Lucky Strikes are good for you because they protect your throat? That was a mistake. It actually causes throat and lung cancer and heart disease. You all need to stop smoking right away. And we said other things too. We said, look, we've got good news. We've got new ways to address heart disease. We've got coronary artery bypass grafts. We've got stents. We've got all kinds of new medications for you. Beta blockers, calcium channel blockers, nitrites, diuretics, statins, anticoagulants, immunomodulators, you name it, we've got it. Take these drugs, stop smoking, you'll be good to go. That was the message. And what happened? Well, the death rate from heart disease dropped almost by half, from 40% to 25% over a 40-year period, from about 1960 to the turn of the century. That's pretty good to see the heart rate drop by half. We were pretty proud of ourselves. Doctors thought we're doing a great job. But is that really true? Imagine, ladies and gentlemen, if you're the manager of a bank, a big bank, and in comes a robber one day, and they hold you and all your 50 people in that bank hostage. And you take out your cell phone, let's say you have a cell phone, and you call the FBI hostage rescue team and say, look, we've got 50 hostages, come and help. And they say, we'll be right there. And they come over. And they do what the FBI hostage rescue team does, right? They negotiate and they turn the lights on, they turn the lights off, the AC on, the heat, whatever. They bring pizza, they bring some soda. They get half the hostages out. And then they go home. And they say, that was great, we saved half the hostages. We're done. That would not be acceptable, would it? Right? We would expect them to do better than that. And yet, that is where we are with modern healthcare. Heart disease remains our leading cause of death. And this, again, is a disease that we invented. So, we really ought to be able to do better. And it kind of makes sense, doesn't it? That we didn't really solve the problem because we never addressed what caused the problem. At the turn of the 20th century, what happened above all was we started eating different unhealthy food and we stopped exercising. And we have been paying the price for that ever since. So, 95% of adults today are fiber deficient, and 95% of adults today don't do a half hour of exercise every day. And that's ironic, because folks, if I were to ask you to raise your hands when you came in and say, who here knows that exercise and healthy food are good for you, we'd all raise our hands. We all know that. We all know that. But we don't all do that. In fact, almost none of us do. What's that about? Why aren't we doing what we could be doing to make ourselves so much healthier? And I think that's worth thinking about. And there's some good reasons for it. And part of it has to do with us, with physicians. Because let's be honest about what happens when you go to the doctor's office. Tell me if this sounds familiar to you. You go in, you sit down in your doctor's office, your doctor comes in, you've got a list of medications that need to be refilled, reviewed, what have you, maybe changed, adjusted. You got some labs to talk about, maybe some studies to talk about, maybe you need to order some new labs, you might need some referrals, you're going to need a follow-up appointment. We get all that done, they listen to your heart and your lungs, check your blood pressure, you're good to go, and on your way out the door, your doctor says to you, hey, by the way, Mr. and Mrs. Jones, don't forget, get some exercise and eat some healthy food. And you turn to your doctor and you say, you got it, doc. Goodbye, see you in October. That was a disingenuous conversation. We didn't mean it, and neither did you. That's what I really think is true. And I don't say that to be critical of us or of you, but just to be honest. Ladies and gentlemen, my medical school training had nothing to do with healthy food or exercise. We spent not one day on those two topics. Medical school, internship, and residency is all about two things above all: diagnosing disease and treating it, usually with drugs. And those are big, important topics. It takes a long time. I'm glad I've got that education. But we are missing the boat because we never solved this problem. And it was a big, big problem. So, I want to talk about what I think we may not be focusing on and could be, and that is the astounding benefit of healthy food and exercise, just how terribly effective it is. And in fact, it's actually indispensable. Because I think we've all just gotten accustomed to the idea that if you just take the right number of drugs, you're going to be good to go. And there's always some new med on the horizon. When I was younger, it was statins, and today it's Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, Zepbound, the GLP-1 agonist. Those are the new favorite drugs that everybody wants. It's going to solve all our problems. And they're not going to do that. They're just not. So I want to just spend a few minutes talking about how we know how impressively effective healthy food and exercise really are. That's what I'd like to prove to you today, okay? So first let's talk about food. Just a few things I want to say before I get to the studies about it. As you know, there's some controversy about what healthy food is. Everybody's got a different idea about what the best diet is. Oh, I need a keto diet, I need a Mediterranean diet, I like to eat meat. No, don't eat meat. You should be vegan. No, you don't need to be. Low fat. No, don't worry about low fat. Whatever. I've been reading a lot about that. That's why I got my nutrition master's degree, because I was interested in sorting some of that stuff out. And the short story is, to cut right to the chase, what I tell my patients, because it's what I've learned looking into this, is we should all be quadrupling our plant intake. Make lunch and dinner at least 3/4 of the plate. Vegetables, legumes, nuts, and seeds. Plants, real plants, not cornflakes, not pasta, not French fries. Those things come from plants, but they're not plants. I'm talking about plants. That food is so terribly good for us. Just a couple other points about plant intake. There are misconceptions about whether plant protein is complete or incomplete. It is complete. All plant protein has all 20 amino acids. It's a myth that that's not true. And if you just eat a healthy diet, you don't have to worry about getting enough protein. That's a big popular idea, isn't it? Make sure you get enough protein. Nobody runs around saying, oh, make sure you get enough carbohydrates, you're probably not getting enough. You're probably fat deficient, you better have more ice cream. You never hear that. But protein, a lot of people are really worried about not getting enough protein. Ladies and gentlemen, we're at the top of the heap in terms of protein intake. Finland is one of the only countries that takes in more protein than we do because they eat so much fish. We are not at risk for protein deficiency as long as we're eating healthy food. So you don't have to worry about that. I just want to note that there's nothing wrong with eating meat. I'll have more to say about that in a minute. But if you compare an animal protein diet to a plant protein diet, the benefit of a plant protein diet is really impressive. It significantly lowers your risk for all kinds of diseases, including cancer and heart disease. So as I said a few minutes ago, 95% of us are fiber deficient. We're not deficient in Metamucil or Colace or Miralax. We're deficient in plants. Plants are the only source of food that has fiber, right? Animal food has no fiber. And look, you can't get 95% of Americans to agree about anything. 20% of Americans think Africa is a country. So, for us to be so uniformly fiber deficient really suggests that almost all of us could be eating more plants and should. It'd be really good for us. I think one of the reasons people don't do that is because they think, oh, I need to have chicken and fish and roast beef or whatever. And by the time you have that food, you're full. And there's not a lot of room left to eat those plants that are so good for us. Don't worry about getting that protein from that animal food. You don't need to. Okay. Last point I want to make, last 2 points I want to make about a healthy diet. There's a common conception that, well, we all descended from hunter-gatherers, and they were healthy, and they ate a lot of meat, so we should eat a lot of meat. We're just like them. It's a good argument. We are just like hunter-gatherers, aren't we? Let's take a look at that. Well, not in some respects. They were really in a search for calories, weren't they? That was their big objective, because their food ran away, and they didn't have grocery stores. I mean, that's what they needed, was calories. And that's not what we need. 3/4 of us are overweight or obese. Most of us contend with that problem, having too much axial fat deposition above all. We don't need calories, they did. What's that got to do with eating meat? Take a look at this. We like to think of cheesecake as being calorie-rich food, right? And it is. But you know what else is calorie-rich food? Chicken, fish, beef, pork. Look at the difference for the same amount of grams of a given food. This animal food has 4 times the calories per gram that non-starchy vegetables and fruit have, and twice as much as starchy vegetables and legumes. That doesn't mean meat is bad for us, but it means that, especially for those of us who are trying to moderate our weight, who don't want to be overweight, or are contending with that problem, meat is a potential detriment for you, not a benefit. Last thing I want to point out about food. I think this is part of the reason we don't eat more healthy food than we do. It's a battle, and you want to know why? Hunter-gatherers were never looking for antelope or arugula. They were looking for cheesecake. They were. Our midbrains are wired to give us huge rewards for intake of 2 things, above all, sugar and fat. Does that resonate? We really feel good when we eat that food, and that is because of our species. That's because of what our ancestors were after. They got huge rewards for finding those foods. Those are calorie-rich foods. And they were able to reproduce and live and survive when they found them. It was good for them, not so much for us. They never found that cheesecake. It didn't exist. But we did. We know where it is. It's in Hannaford. You could blindfold me, and I could take you by the hand and bring you into that store, take you to the right, then past the vegetables and fruit, whatever. Make a left, go down, past the croissants and the bagels on your left, then there's some cakes, and then there's the cheesecake, about 15 yards down on the left. I know exactly where it is. Where's the arugula? I can't tell you. So this is the scene of high drama. It really is. When you go to the store, you're facing a battle. And it's your ancestors' battle. We're contending with their instincts. And we just have to. So it's not easy, I get that. But it's really worth the struggle. I don't know that Hannaford ought to say welcome to hell in their adverts. That seems a little dramatic. But you take my point. Okay, so now I want to talk to you about some studies, just a few. And I want to show you first how incredibly effective exercise, regular exercise is in reducing risk for death and disease. This is my favorite slide in this show. This boring line tells 2 astonishing stories. What they did was look at 120,000 adults. This is in 2018. And this y-axis here describes risk for death. Up here is a high risk and down here is a low risk. And this x-axis describes people doing no exercise all the way over to elite athletes, okay? And it compares what's your risk for death depending on the type of exercise you do. None or a whole heck of a lot, and everything in between. And there are two stories this graph tells. One is, the more exercise you do, the better. There is no upper limit. You just keep on getting healthier and healthier the farther you go in terms of the amount of exercise you do. It's astounding. Now, ladies and gentlemen, if you're like me, not innately fond of exercise, and it's something you only do because you have to, that might feel like bad news. Because you might think, oh my God, now I got to do a whole bunch of exercise to be healthy. That's awful. But here's the second thing this graph tells you. That's actually not true. Who gets the biggest benefit from doing exercise? It's the group that went from no exercise to below average. That slope is the steepest, meaning that cohort had the greatest benefit from doing exercise. What's another way of putting that? If you do no exercise and you just start doing some, you get a huge benefit. That's true. Second study of two studies I want to show you about exercise. This just came out last November. And it looked at 6 groups of people. Healthy, fit, normal weight people, and by fit I mean aerobically fit. They could run on a treadmill and do that comfortably. That's the definition of fit for this study. Fit, normal weight people, fit overweight and fit obese people, and unfit normal weight people, unfit overweight and unfit obese people. And the question was, which of those groups are at increased risk for disease? And the answer was, across the board, only the people who were not doing exercise, only the unfit people. The fit people, regardless of their weight, did fine. It was a really powerful statement that exercise is protective and beneficial and therapeutic. It's true. Okay. Now I want to talk about 3 studies that show how powerful the combination of exercise and food are in reducing your risk for death and disease. But before I do that, I've been talking for a few minutes now, and I want to ask you, how are you doing? I'm going to pass that. Are you feeling like this? You know, the only real reason I like to do these talks is because I get to show that slide. Sometimes, I'll be home with Heidi and she'll be in the other room and she'll be saying, "What are you doing in there?" And I'll say, "I'm working on my talk." And I'm just watching this slide. I like that dog. I'm almost done. I'm going to summarize 3 studies on the combination of food and exercise, and that's going to wrap this talk up for me. Those 3 studies are impressive. One was published in 2010, and it was a look at 13,000 people. And the second study was, just going to move to that, because I'm going to summarize them all together for you. The second one was in 2014, looking at 20,000 male adults. And then the third was in 2015, I believe, and that looked at almost 90,000 women. And all 3 of these studies looked at the same question. If you combine regular exercise and a reasonably healthy diet, like a Mediterranean diet, and you do some other basic things, like have no to very little alcohol, get 7 hours of sleep a night, don't smoke, have a normal blood pressure and normal cholesterol, if you do all those things and you compare that group to a group that doesn't do any of those things, how much better off are you? And the answer for all 3 of those studies was your risk of death, premature death and disease drops by between 80 and 95%. I mean, just staggering. And ladies and gentlemen, look at the difference of how effective healthy food and exercise is compared to drugs. The most effective drug in the world is aspirin. For people at risk for heart disease, that reduces your risk by 1/3. That's very powerful. Statins are about 25%, other meds are less than that. That's great benefit. I'm not neglecting those meds, but for Pete's sake, holy cow, what a contrast with what healthy food and exercise will do for us. So, we all knew that healthy food and exercise is good for us, but I think what a lot of people don't pay attention to or want to talk about or acknowledge is that it's not good for us. It's indispensable. We can't be healthy without it. It can't be done. We will have a gap between our health span and our lifespan, inevitably, unless we embrace this truth. We've got to get back to the way our ancestors lived. And it was just unfortunately in our lifetimes, really, that this whole problem came to light. Just 200 years ago, we wouldn't have had to have this talk at all. Everybody was active, everybody was eating real food. And that was that. They died of other things. And we've got the benefit of antibiotics and all that great stuff. But that is not Ozempic and Wegovy and all the other meds, rosuvastatin, lisinopril, whatever. They are not a replacement for what healthy food and exercise will do for us. They are not. And it's the difference between living a long, healthy life and then dying, and having the last 10 to 20% of your life, call it 15 years, being sicker and sicker and more miserable. And we've all seen that. And it doesn't have to be. We're all so used to it. But it doesn't have to be. So my suggestion is, when you go see your doctor, sit down and say, I want to come up with a plan to make this work. Because it's not easy. McDonald's is right down the street. All the crappy food we need is right there waiting for us. It's not easy, but it's doable. And the exercise regimen that we need is doable. You can start with 5 minutes a day. And I only would suggest you do that 7 days a week, when you feel like it and when you don't. But establish that habit, and each month increase by 5 minutes. And a year later, you're doing an hour a day. And you're doing it safely, without hurting yourself. And there's a way to do that. And it's different for everybody. I understand that some of us have heart disease and arthritis and this and that. I get that. So everybody's plan might be a little bit different. But I think what you and I ought to be talking about as doctors and patients is this. Because this is where the payoff is. This is where the benefit is. What do you think of that? Thank you, folks, so much for listening. I hope this was interesting and helpful.
Well done.